And today's topic is arguing with your kids. Do you? Or do you think that your kids always want to argue with you? Do you avoid it? Or maybe you allow it, but it always seems to escalate to the point of aggression and anger? I have noticed that we have a serious ADD problem here, at least in America. No, I don't mean an attention deficit, but I mean this epidemic of anger, defiance, and disrespect. Problem seems to stem from the fact that once we hear a no, our defense mechanisms are unleashed and we react with instant rebuttals or maybe even force or threats. We start defending or denying or blaming, legitimizing our position. Immediately, the other person is triggered into a similar reactive stance. And we also tend to argue from a place of lack, trying to get something that we think someone is denying us. Arguing from this place is a signal that we are craving respect and acknowledgement in our lives. Another challenge with our framework for arguing that we have is that we don't really know how to get out of it. Maybe you argue until you win and you never inch any closer to hearing the other person. Or maybe you feel that the only way to get out of an argument is to give in. This leaves us to not solving conflict or listening with compassion, but actually avoiding conflict in fear of uncomfortable confrontation or these uncomfortable positions which leave us feeling depleted and worn out. So today I want to share some solutions that will empower you to argue without the anger. My first tip is to change your perspective on arguing. In the book Nurture Shock by Poe Bronson and Ashley Merriman, they tackle a bunch of myths that we hold about kids and childhood, and one of them includes some really surprising information about arguing. Researchers found that the more arguing, the less deceptive the home. Yes, when your kids argue with you, it's actually a sign of respect, not disrespect. The University of Rochester researchers confirmed that over the long term, moderate conflict during adolescence is associated with better adjustment than non-conflict or frequent conflict. Yep, the kids who argued with their parents were the ones who were more likely to respect the rules. It's like if your kid is taking the time to argue with you about something that is important to him, then it means that he wants to have your opinion, your connection. He wants to hear your ideas and even maybe win your approval, or at least have your respect. And by hearing him out and validating that need, he is more likely to respect your limits. Whereas the kids who came from the homes with parents who were more strict or authoritarian in their enforcement of the rules and who were not open to any discussion had kids who not only didn't bother to argue, but they didn't bother to follow the rules either. They just agreed to the rules up front only to break them later. Most of you aren't thinking of conflict and arguing as beneficial to the relationship. You get all wigged out and offended, and you see it as the sign of disrespect or a sign that your child is not going to accept or follow your limit or your rule. But the teens in one mother-daughter study actually said that conflict with their mom is something that strengthened their relationships. It's how we view things that affects how we feel, that affects how we respond. So breathe through your triggers. Instead of reacting with an instant, I don't want to hear another word about this, can you listen without letting your triggers run your reactions? Because arguing doesn't have to be volatile. It can be an honest exchange of differing opinions. Just because you allow your children to argue their disagreements and their ideas doesn't mean that you have to change those rules or those limits. Keeping an open line of communication means that you are willing to hear what another person has to offer and that you respect that your child has another perspective or a different idea about the situation. It doesn't take away from your decisions or your values or your authority. Kids who are shut down without being able to voice their upset or their frustration tend to be the kids who simply go along to get along. The long-term consequence is that they never get to express their more complex thoughts and feelings. Giving kids the opportunity to be heard develops so much more than if you just focus on obedience. Arguing helps develop their complex thinking, which is housed in the executive center, When you stimulate the area, this prefrontal cortex, you turn on the mechanisms for healing, for self-regulation, for resiliency to unfold. This is how kids mature in the right direction. My next tip is to argue with acceptance. Arguing doesn't have to be a game of I want this, but you want that, or I need to, or you need to do this, or you can't because you have to, this back and forth. Can you just validate your child's need or his opinion or an idea without defending your reasoning or defending your limits? Breathing deeply through your own triggers to shift your perspective will allow you to honor your child's needs and opinions in the situation without feeling like you have to explain yourself or defend yourself. By listening to the points you hear and then responding with acknowledgement, rather than trying to convince or change or judge your child for not seeing it your way, is going to help the arguing move forward in a positive direction. You can say, I hear that you feel this is unfair. You're wanting more freedom or more privacy or more choice. That's completely understandable. Just acknowledge, just reflect what you hear. It's hard for someone to get aggressive and combative when you are showing compassion and when they feel like they are heard, even if you aren't changing anything. And then finally, how do you end the argument? Well, many arguments will wrap themselves up nicely if you just remain non-judgmental and non-combative. Continuous arguing or arguing that gets heated likely stems from one person refuting what the other person has to say. Now, this kind of argument might be helpful if you're solving a puzzle or if you're trying to understand a subject more deeply, but the kind of arguing for limits that your child may do simply needs to be met with a listening ear and an understanding presence. You don't need to prove the validity of your limits or engage in the argument from a heated place of emotionality. That is the toughest part and yet the most valuable lesson, to listen, to hear what another person has to say, and to reflect and acknowledge without defaming or criticizing or putting that person down. That is a gift for you and your child. And the way that you end an argument is simply to allow it to unfold without expectation. Affirm that you're going to stay calm, open, and receptive to what you hear because you know that it's an honest expression of your child's experience and not just a sign of disrespect. Put on those giraffe ears and listen for the pain and the passion behind the words or the behaviors. He may not have the best tools for arguing, but that will develop over time as he has good models and practice. The skill and the confidence to speak without denying another comes from being allowed to speak your truth. We are always more receptive to another person's ideas when we feel like our own ideas have also been heard and considered. Arguing can be a healthy exchange of ideas. It can be a way to offload stress, the stress of uncomfortable feelings or situations, and a great exercise in gaining clarity and perspective. So that was my teachable moment for you today. I hope that you found some comfort in knowing that arguing does not actually have to be a bad thing if you can learn to argue without letting your anger get in the way. Thank you guys so much for watching and for sharing and for liking these videos. Until next time, please remember, it is about consciousness, not perfection.